Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost. It's Friday. It's May 26th. This is about, I think it's our 157th consecutive TRU Community Gathering. This is something we started back in April 17th, 2021. I remember the exact date. It's April 17th, 2021. We're faced with the prospect of closing our business because nothing that we did was virtual at that point. Everything was live, and we were in something called shutdown. Does everybody remember shutdown? You remember that? Remember shutdown? I had to do something, and somebody told me that I should maybe try doing things in Zoom. I tried doing things virtually. At the time, doing a TRU program virtually just seemed impossible. I didn't know how to do it. I mean, what do you do? How do you do that? What is Zoom? Somebody took my hand and basically explained Zoom to me. We got a Zoom account. We opened up a room, and people started flocking to our Friday community gatherings. Much to my surprise, and I was very actually touched and very moved by it. So we've been doing this for 157 weeks. Of course, when we first started, it was kind of a community, an opportunity for people to feel part of a community during isolation, during quarantine. And we had two years of that, and 2 years of doing conversations and having people come every Friday. We usually get between 30 and 90 people to these gatherings. If you want to be part of it, you can email me and I can put you on the list and we can send you the link. So if you're out there in podcast land or watching us on YouTube, email me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and I'll send you the link. The nice thing about being in the room with my guests is you get to ask questions, and you get to actually sometimes talk to them and meet them. So today we've gone way beyond talking about being in isolation, but we're still talking about things that have been prominent for us during shutdown. One of the things that happened during shutdown that I will never forget, I think none of us will ever forget, is we were forced to look at things that were going on in the world and in our society and in our culture. We had no place to hide. We were in our rooms, so we had nothing to do, and we were seeing things on videos, and we saw George Floyd, and we saw Rihanna, and we saw everything else that was going on, and it was pretty disturbing, and it was a different moment. It seemed to be a different moment for us because this was a time where we couldn't look away. It was very easy for all of us, especially non-BIPOC people, to be very outraged and furious and angry about what was going on, and then still not do anything. This time, I think we were thrown a little bit more of a challenge. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I have two people who coming in today, Laqui and Miranda Gohh, who saw what was going on in our industry and they did something about it. Not everybody does something about it. We all have great intentions. We all do. I know that. But I want you to meet Rob and Miranda because they saw a need and they decided to do something to make things happen that would make the world, well, at least our industry, but maybe the world, a little different. So welcome, Rob, and welcome, Miranda. Why don't you introduce yourselves? You're multi hyphenates, and you've done tons of stuff, and I would just get it wrong if I tried to tell everybody all the things that you've done, but you really have a great backgrounds, and I'm so honored to have you both here. Miranda, why don't you start? Why don't you say hi to everyone and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you were up to before all this happened, and what you're up to now, because I think your life has changed a lot in 3 years.
Sure.
I would guess.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and nice to be here in this space with everyone. My name is Miranda Gohh. I am a producer in New York. I before the pandemic, I was working primarily in nonprofit theater. So I was at Manhattan Theater Club, MTC, as a company manager of their off-Broadway space at City Center, and had always had aspirations to break into commercial producing. But uh, uh, as someone who didn't grow up in this industry, it wasn't always clear to me how to go about learning how to become a commercial producer. And so, um, March 2020, it was pretty clear that our industry would not be bouncing back anytime soon. And I was quickly without a job. I was a company manager, so it was clear that my specific role would not be applicable within MTC for a little bit. And so that really gave me the opportunity to think about what I wanted to do with my life and ask myself all the questions I'm sure a lot of people in this room ask. Do I still want to do theater? If so, what does that look like? And if yes, why? And I think a lot of people can agree that making a life in the theater is not the easiest path a human being can choose. And so I did still feel really strongly and passionate about the art form of theater itself, and wanted to give it a full go at commercial producing. And through that time, I had a lot of fruitful conversations with folks like Rob, our peers at the Industry Standard Group, which is an organization that we founded together, to think about how we could affect change that was meaningful and important to us on Broadway. That led me to start my organization, Theater Producers of Color. And we can go more into the work of both of those organizations, but long story short, the pandemic ended, I moved back to New York, and now I work full-time in commercial producing. That looks like me supporting a number of producers. I'm the associate producer to Ken Davenport, where I work on A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical, as well as Harmony, the new musical coming to Broadway this fall by Barry Manilow and Bruce Sussman. I'm also the associate producer to Matt Ross at Stairwell Productions, where he produced What the Constitution Means to Me. Dana H. is This a Room, so very different taste and approach to theater than Ken. So that's been really exciting. And I'll also be the associate producer on the one-man show Just for Us by Alex Edelman, which moves to the Hudson Theater on Broadway next month. So that is how I've been spending the last year and a half. I've also dipped my toe into co-producing, which has been very exciting. I was a co-producer on K-pop this winter, and I'm also a co-producer on the musical Here Lies Love with Rob that opens at the Broadway Theater this summer. So I've had my hands full. We can go further into all of what I just discussed, but that's me in a nutshell. And
I don't think I could have done that as well. So
yeah,
thank you so much. I mean, you're very. I mean, you have an amazing range of experience, and I think we're very lucky to have you in the room. So thank you for being with us.
thank you. And I'll pass it on to Rob.
Yeah, pass it on to Rob. Rob, it's your turn.
Hi, thanks for having us, Bob, and thanks for everyone for joining. It's really impressive that you've had 157 consecutive meetings where the group is intact and still going strong. I think that's amazing.
Impressive or exhausting? I'm not sure which.
Impressive can be exhausting, Bob. That's theater. That's theater. Actually, that's a great definition. My background, I went to school for musical theater and music and ended up not doing either of those things. I was a performer, an artist I started down at La Mama downtown for many years. It's La Mama Baby, one of Ellen Stewart's sort of last class in, basically. And then I went into dance. I was in contemporary and modern dance. I was with a company called Momix for many years. And then that led to puppetry as a professional puppeteer. I was in Warhorse, and then I puppeteered for the Cirque du Soleil, and toured around the world for close to 20 years between dance and puppetry. Through Warhorse, I ended up in contact with the National Theatre of Great Britain. And that contact led me to do press rep for them and some press events, which led to more opportunities. I worked in their development department, also events, and then eventually in producing for them in the New York office here. And then from that, that led to working with Mara Isaacs and her company Octopus Theatricals as an associate producer. And then I'm currently an associate producer with No Guarantees, which is a production company here in New York. And I'm associate on Bad Cinderella, closing soon, so get your tickets to that fun show. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, Avita up at ART and headed to FTC in the fall. I've also been active in my own projects outside of production houses. As Miranda mentioned, come see Here Lies Love this summer. It's going to be a blast. I'm also a co-pro on the Hadestown tour, as well as I was a co-pro on A Strange Loop, which is the show that earns a Tony Award, which is crazy. It's like sitting right next to me, which is also weird. In its box, because I don't know what to do with it.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, literally, like, it's in a box.
Well, congratulations. The box is very nice.
I'm just like, I don't know where to put it. The joke with my friend is like, I should put it like next to like in the kitchen, next to like the spatulas and stuff, just so people like randomly discover it when they're getting like a spoon from a drawer.
That's a plan. Sure.
Somewhere really inconspicuous.
So today we're gonna. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I had Adam Hindman. We had him here for one of these conversations last year. We had Adam with. Do you know Tara Moses?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we had the two of them. Yeah. So we had the two of them. So it's tricky territory for me as a host to talk about this, but I do it. I just do it because I think I have to. We're going to talk about DEI. We're going to talk about what the specific word. Let me ask you this: how much did We See You White American Theater influence your decisions to start your companies, or was it just random that they both happened at the same time?
I think it actually to look at the sort of impetus for the Industry Standard Group, and then by extension, Second Act Theatrical Capital. I can trace it back to conversations I had with Tony Israel, who's one of our other co-founders, which is pre-pandemic.
I thought she was going to be here. Oh,
that's why there's 8 of us. We're just
tell her I whimpered when I realized she wasn't here.
Tony is also, we've all gotten very, very busy since sort of like the restart of Broadway. And it's been definitely one of the challenges is that within the microcosm of our organization, but also in general, where in the great pause and sort of trauma of 2020, we had to ask ourselves these questions. But the actual impetus for our group, or one of our groups, the Industry Standard Group, actually happened pre-pandemic. And it was a conversation that Tony and I had in the Hadestown production room, because like I said, I work with Mara Isaacs, and it was one of the most diverse production rooms. And then the realization of what that meant in terms of decision-making, in terms of asset creation, all of these things that those rooms decide, there was a realization that, oh, the diversity in this room actually adds so much, especially to a show like Hadestown. And so it was very intentionally built by that the producing team. So
I'm glad that you're saying that, because you know Ron Simons, right? Ron is a good friend of ours, and he always talks about being the only black face in a room. And that's basically what, guys, if you don't know it, that's what our industry has been for forever. So even though we haven't changed as much as we need to, it's a little different now.
I mean, it's always going to be an evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always going to be evolution, and activism is always going to be an evolution. It's always going to be, the line's going to be over there. You'll never cross a finish line in terms of activism. Like, there'll be
moving
milestones and tent poles that are established, but nature of humanity is just an evolution. So what happened in the pandemic is that we were actually able to take a pause and gather ourselves, the 8 of us, into these weekly conversations, much like what you're doing here, that then formalized into the organization, because we were realizing that in terms of representation and DEI work in commercial theater producing, no one else was really doing it. And we kind of kept going with it after formalizing the organization, because no one else was doing it. Like, we were the people that were going to continue doing it and developing what it meant to really support and build out and cultivate producers of color in the particularly in the commercial theater producing space,
Let me
because
go
it's a
into
different thing than nonprofit producing. There's a difference in these things.
I want to bounce off of that because it makes me think of something, and I do think it's a conversation worth having. After we see white American theater, there was a movement. I mean, people were suddenly conscious, and they were suddenly there was an awareness that regional theaters were really lacking in terms of diversity representation, and everybody seemed to be pushed to want to do something. How successful do you think we've been? How far have we? I know that the line is constantly moving, but how successful do you think we've been to date? I know last year on Broadway, we had seven plays that were by Black artists and with Black production teams. Everybody has good intentions. I don't know how much that matters. What's the difference between good intentions and something that really matters? What can we do that matters? I also ask this as true because we have a diversity program and we're still looking for things that are worth doing, that are worthwhile doing. And we don't want to assume that we know what those things are. We keep asking the community, what do you need?
I think it depends what you measure success as, I suppose. Like, if you quantify success, like I said, activism, one of the things that, and Miranda can speak to this as well, or disagree if she wants to with me. But I think in the conversation we had that then formalized our organization, there was a realization that what we do as theater makers and storytellers is innately stitched to activism. And so for myself and my personal sort of practice, the realization of what activism actually is and its definition was something that was really formative in my producing practice as well. That it's so easy, especially I think in American society, to measure things as success and failures, and sort of this binary and this black and white, like either make money or you lose money, and that's a success or a failure. But those qualifying factors are myriad, right? Like, what does success to me means this process is different than the process before, or the invitation is more open than before, or this room is more diverse than before. Like, to me, these are successes. So I think one of the traps that especially commercial theaters get into, or commercial theater producers get into, is pointing to a season that was literally like last season, going, well, those shows didn't make any money, so we're never going to go and do that again. Versus, look at the invitation that we opened up, look at the opportunity we presented to these many people that were never presented this opportunity. Those are measured successes as well. And also, you're establishing people into places that you don't know where they're going to bloom. The decentralization of commercial theater producing from New York is also a question that we've asked ourselves. Like, why do all regional theaters point to New York as like Broadway as a success, right? Versus like cultivating regional voices and the communities that have theater makers and storytellers in those regions. Those are just measured successes as well, at least, to me. So I think it's a question of defining what we think of as success. There's a reframing that's going on in total. And to go back to what you're saying about we see white theater America, it was actually a different point of view, I think, from a producerial standpoint, because there was obviously a lot, and there's just a lot of anger about white supremacy in every space. So the reaction that we had as an organization, I think, was probably a little bit more, I don't want to say measured, but like the idea of what change is from a producer standpoint is very different than maybe an artist standpoint. So it's not that it didn't necessarily dictate how our approach and structure was as an organization, but we definitely clocked it, because we were like, yes, as as all producers of color in this, room every time, we're like, and like we just kind of innately understood not
Yeah.
all of the points there because we lived them.
So Miranda, would you like to elaborate on what, I mean, there's nothing to elaborate on. He said a lot of interesting stuff. But let's hear your point of view, if it's a little different, or if you see things very similarly to Rob. And again, it's all,
Yeah,
for me, it's all about the impetus that got you guys to start these
sure.
groups that are doing concrete work. I mean, it's tangible work.
Yeah, well, I want to comment on your previous question, which I think will lend itself to telling you more about the impetus for starting theater producers of color in the industry standard group. But I think as an industry, we were very eager to affect change immediately as soon as we returned to the theater, right? That came from a number of sources, where right now New York State is giving us this tax credit where we that will help us to return to the theater in a safer way than we might have been in otherwise. So for those of you who don't know, you can apply for this tax credit where you can receive up to $3 million in a tax credit for a new Broadway production, play, or musical. But to qualify for that tax credit, you have to have a DEI plan in place, right? So changes being made by that government, the opportunity that this government is bestowing upon us. And I think asking producers to present a DEI plan has led to a lot of opportunities for young up-and-coming BIPOC folks getting positions in producing and general management offices. So I think that's great. I think the theater owners are being we're seeing different programming than we might have seen pre-pandemic, where, to your point, a number of shows that centered BIPOC folks has been produced on Broadway in the past 2 years. Would those shows have been given theaters pre-pandemic? Maybe not, but I have seen that sort of behavioral shift from the theater owners. And of course,
That's very interesting. You have seen a big behavioral shift in the, because we've had conversations where
yeah.
we're very concerned about the fact that things seem to be so controlled by the white male theater owners.
Well, it's still the same story, where all three of the main theaters are held and controlled by the same people who were controlling them pre-pandemic. But I have seen younger producers get theaters that wouldn't have before, producers of color who I didn't even know of pre-pandemic getting theaters. So I think that has been exciting. So all of this to say, I think change is happening, is for sure happening, and nothing will change overnight. But my big question right now is how do we make the change that we all want to happen sustainable change, right? Because to Rob's point, all of these amazing initiatives were started during the pandemic when we didn't have a whole lot going on. And now, in my introduction, I told you I don't have just one job, I have like 5 different jobs, right? And so how do I myself, as a theater maker and producer, find time to commit to the values that I put out into the world during the pandemic, and make sure that I am staying committed to the organization that I birthed during the pandemic, and all of the people who've gone through my program. And I think that applies to everyone. Once this tax credit goes away, will all of those opportunities for young BIPOC folks go away? So I think it's us being very clear on what our values are, and knowing where how to prioritize them in our day-to-day practice as theater makers and producers, even though we're busier than ever. So that's sort of what I've been thinking about in this post-pandemic era.
I guess let's get a little bit more specific about the two companies that you guys have created, and the differences between the two of them, what they do, how they function, and who can be part of it. Who can be part of what you're doing? How can people join you?
I can speak to the industry standard group portion. Like I said, it was founded in 2020 over sort of conversations over that spring and summer. 8 BIPOC producers in the space, in different spaces, commercially kind of got together and then formalized what it would mean to sort of make this organization to support particularly BIPOC producers into the industry. We're basically creating a community to cultivate more community. And then as we sort of grew out what that meant, we also realized that there were a lot of people that just weren't invited to the space, that you know, from industry professionals that have worked in this industry for years, but didn't actually have stake into anything that they were a part of. And the difference between what that means, like professionally in any other industry, where let's say you work for a corporation, but you get, you know, shares in that corporation as a benefit. And so you actually have stake, and it changes how you approach the companies you work for. So we were asking ourselves all of these big questions. And so what we ended up really focusing on and we're still sort of in the midst of it, is really building out a fund that will then support productions as a co-producer, in terms of resource, in terms of creating community and around this resource. And that is a much lower rate in terms of giving to productions. So basically it's a producing fund, but with community elements sort of attached to it. And we, at first, the conversation really was about supporting, and it still is about supporting producers of color specifically, but it's a broader fund that anyone can really participate in. That's welcome into sort of our ethos as an organization of being able to support up and coming producers of color, people that haven't been welcomed in the commercial theater producing space. And so we worked with a legal team over at Morgan Lewis, who was also interested in what fundraising, or what investing looked like in terms of socially conscious investing. So they helped us build out this fund, in which we have called the Second Act Theatrical Capital. We're always sort of minutes from a big public launch, but we want to be sure all of our everything's in order so that we can really go into the space full tilt and have everything in place and to be able to support the community that we're bringing in. The long ramp that we've had to be able to get to this point has actually been really beneficial in being able to sort of net community, have conversations like this, continue sort of building out network and interest around what equitable standards look like in commercial theater producing. So we have our fund that we're doing, and also we're developing programmatic elements to be able to like do very similar to what you're doing, just a space where people can be educated in terms of what commercial theater producing is, how it's traditionally been done, and also like how it can be changed, finding affinity groups within our own communities to then really diversify the stories, diversify the artists and the people into these spaces.
I would love to talk to you guys at some point about possibilities of partnering, because
yeah,
it does sound like we have some things in common.
Absolutely.
Miranda, same question to you. Can you define the differences between what your two different companies do? And I want to go back to kind of not only what I said, but my attitude earlier. I'm frustrated that I'm frustrated with good intentions, although I appreciate that. how do you feel what you've done has gone beyond good intentions and is really concrete and tangible and really helping make things change? Rob, very interesting that you immediately connected everything to activism, and we always talk about activism here as well. We talk about the importance of activism and how do we make change happen? You know, how do we change things? And I go back to the point that you made about it being evolution. Evolution is very slow. So Miranda, you take it away
Yeah,
from me.
sure. With your question about good intentions, I think we just have to be realistic that we're living in a world now where actions speak louder than words, and I think all of us can say what we would like to see happen out in the world, but it's now we're finding ourselves at a moment where we have to ask ourselves, how we can find the right partners and to share resources to affect that change and find the time to make that change sustainable, like I mentioned before. So with theater producers of color, I alluded to my professional experience working in the nonprofit theater, where right out of college, I knew, I guess just to go back a little bit, I didn't grow up as a theater person. I grew up as an athlete. I played ice hockey all of my life, and I actually went to college for that sport. And halfway through my college career, I decided to quit. I was a goalie, and I was getting no playing time, and we were last place, and that was not fulfilling me in the same way it had been before. And between my sophomore and junior years in college, I spent a summer in New York, and I saw the musical Fun Home, and it totally changed my world, where not only did I really respond to a lot of the themes being addressed in the musical, but I didn't know that there could be a theater in the round that I could look across the stage and see someone mirroring my response, or that there could be one character played by three different actors of different ages who could respond to each other. And so I really fell in love with theater that summer. And what I loved about Fun Home, I saw it maybe like 6 times that summer, but what I loved about Fun Home was that not only was it artistically successful, right? It won every award. It was extended at the public time after time. And it was just a beautiful piece of theater that I still think about today. But not only was it artistically successful, but it was financially successful, where there was a time when they were at capacity every single week. They recouped, and they made money on the show. And to me, I really responded to Fun Home and identified the role of a producer as something I wanted to do, meaning I wanted to connect the rest of the world to pieces of art that were important and special to me. So I came out of that in head over heels with theater, never having done it before, but knowing and thinking to myself, I think I want to be a producer, but I had no clue what that meant or how to make that happen, right? I didn't know the difference between nonprofit theater or commercial theater. I didn't know what a general manager was or what a marketing agency was, but I had this drive in me. And so I went back to school, and I just started pursuing the opportunities that were most accessible to me. I would cold email the local theaters in Connecticut and say, can I intern with you? And I started learning that way. But that was my education. And when I, made my way to New York, I was making a lot of great progress. I was at MTC, and I was meeting all the right people, but I still found it very challenging to get my foot in the door as an aspiring producer. I think most of us, if not all of us, know that this industry is really built around who you know and what relationships you have, where if you know the right people, you can bring a certain, or if you have a certain value that you can bring to the table, it's much easier for you to get from point A to point B. And during the pandemic, when I was asking myself, do I still want to do this, commercial producing, the answer was yes. But I thought about the change that I wanted to see in the industry. And for me, change had to come from the top down. It had to start with the producer who would bring in their own values into their day-to-day practice. And for me, if I had all these privileges as someone who got to work at MTC, who got to, have my first job out of college at Arena Stage, if I had all of these privileges, but still wasn't sure how to get into commercial producing myself, I was really concerned about everyone else who probably had similar aspirations as me to get into producing, who was a person of color, but had no clue how to get there. So basically, thank you for letting me indulge in my previous history, but all of that to say, that's what drove me to found Theater Producers of Color, where I essentially wanted to create a free Producing 101 course specifically for BIPOC folks that was accessible, meaning you didn't have to be located in New York. You could join via Zoom because it was the pandemic. It was tuition free. I was lucky enough to have been able to do the Commercial Theater Institute CTI 14-week course, but that's inaccessible to some folks. It's $1,000 and you need a letter of recommendation from a Broadway League member. So I asked myself all the questions, like, what are the barriers that are keeping people out of commercial producing and how can we break them down? And so I created a 10-week course called Producing 101 under my organization, Theater Producers of Color, that I worked with Rashad Chambers, who's now a brilliant, amazing producer, lead producer on Fat Ham now, that Rob's company, No Guarantees, also worked on. But we put together a curriculum for 10 weeks and said, what are the nuts and bolts that people need to know about commercial producing? So we came up with a curriculum. We invited guest speakers to join us, and we opened applications. We capped the class at 25 people. And we said, let's see who comes. We ended up getting many more applications than we anticipated, over 300 in our first year. So that was great that we knew that our suspicion that there were folks who were hungry to learn about commercial producing and were BIPOC were valid. And so now we find ourselves in the fortunate position where we're in our third year of the organization. Every year we hold a 10-week Producing 101 class, capped at 25 students. The producer, Sammy Lopez, has now joined us as a program mentor. And by the end of this June, we'll have 76 alums. And it's really been a testament to the value of community, where all these people from disparate corners of the earth have now met each other, have formed production companies. Some have already co-produced on Broadway and off Broadway. Some are already Tony-nominated producers. So it's really been an amazing ride where you see what can happen when you really give hungry, ambitious, smart, talented people the opportunity to get their foot in the door and just run away with the knowledge and the connections. So that's what Theater Producers of Color does. We provide free education to aspiring BIPOC producers. And, I'll let Rob chime in about the connection between our two organizations. But I love that with Theater Producers of Color, we don't intend for people to graduate from our program after 10 weeks and all of a sudden become commercial producers. That's impossible because learning how to be a producer is a lifelong journey, but we introduce people to the nuts and bolts so that when the time comes for them to start producing, they have enough familiarity and connections to get their projects off the ground. And what I love about the industry standard group is that it seems to be a natural extension to the education that we provide, where they can really get hands-on experience in commercial producing, learning about investments and how to assess different commercial projects from both an artistic and financial standpoint. And again, is an extension of the community that I've been talking about. So that is Theater Producers of Color in a nutshell. And I'm very proud of both organizations that Rob and I have founded, and that they're still continuing on today.
We should find a way of interacting our two organizations, because we also teach people a producing course. In fact, Jane Dubin, who is in the room, you mentioned Dana H. and Is This a Room? Jane was one of the producers of that. She teaches our master class, and we are eager to have more producers of color in our program, but we have to find a way so that we can help each other, because it sounds like we're doing some very similar work, and I would love to be able to be part of what you do. So Rob, did you want to jump in on anything else about that?
I think that this is all just, these organizations formed in an organic need in these moments, and the fortitude and sort of determination it takes to keep something like that happening is also related, I think, to activism, where you don't just go, we did it one day and that's it. Like, there was a day, I think we were on a call for TISG and your standard group, and we were like, oh, this is a long game. Right. Got it. We're not just like build it. Like, I think there was like this early iteration. We've had many iterations and many conversations, and Miranda can speak to this too, where like we're like, yeah, it'll be like a year or something. Like, when I think back to early conversations, and we were, I think that attitude is very good, right? But it's this kind of work in terms of long-term change, to really steer this giant ship. It takes so much work to like move it a degree, and you don't even notice. It takes a lot of dedication and time, and one of the biggest challenges is really, as like I mentioned earlier, when we all started to back up again, we basically hit the ground at like 100 miles an hour, and all of us, because of the conversations that we had during the traumatic break of 2020, like we all became very busy, the 8 of us, in our own practices, our own ways. And so then that balance where all of a sudden we're like, oh, what it takes to run an organization as well as develop your own professional practice is definitely like this balancing act. And one of the loveliest things I think that exists both in TPOC and in TISG is that the communities that we've created, we grant each other a lot of grace in terms of what it means to continue to build up these organizations. And by extension, the realization that when someone else grants you grace, that it's not going to be a perfect thing every time, or it's not like we're not going to solve it right away, that then you grant yourself a certain amount of grace in your own personal choices professionally to some degree, which is so different than what we've all sort of, or a lot of us, I think, in the arts grow up with, where it's like you have to commit 1000% of your entire there's just a lot of idea that being an artist or being in producing or storytelling or narrative form is the biggest sacrifice that you must make. Like, you're going to starve, you're going to be, so we're already setting ourselves up for a lot of, if we're telling ourselves this as theater makers, how do we expect success to happen if we're like, this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do? It's like that kind of grace that you can grant yourself to say, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to meet the people I need to meet, and we're going to change a thing. It just changes how you think of as success or winning, right? So I think that that's something that both organizations really take on, and I think that comes from community building, and it comes from the network that we're trying to establish, the outside of the pre-existing networks that exist in our industry.
I see a couple questions. Owen, do you want to bring in some of the questions from the room?
Sure thing. We had a question from John Ewing that was answered by
we
Rob
have
in
a
the
few
chat.
of them.
Yes, but I'll start with, does the industry standard group only focus on Broadway projects?
Yeah, currently, yes. So because our co-founder experience lives in that particular space, we're focusing on change in that particular space. It doesn't negate for future projects that live outside of that space, but our focus is Broadway commercial theater productions.
I have a clarification, I guess I want. You talked about the community that you're creating, and you talked about how this whole thing was founded because a bunch of you came together and you were meeting on Zoom. And is there room for new people to come into your group rather than people who are coming to take your course, would there be room for people to actually join you in your conversations?
Yeah, so as we're building out, so right now we're still in sort of in a private phase of building. So once it becomes a public phase, we're working on what membership actually looks like and what engagement for membership looks like. As of right now, the 8 co-founders are the major decision makers for the organization. We've talked about what it means as that evolution then restructures as the membership grows. So we're basically gathering people to the space now, and at the same time, like building out what our infrastructure looks like and decision-making processes look like, which I can then sort of like jump into another question that John asked about how we decide things. Right now, the 8 of us decide things because, we're still building it out.
The specific question is, how does the industry standard group make decisions on projects to invest in? Does a certain amount of producers and cast have to be BIPOC?
So we're coming up with a thing called the threshold of responsibility, which then is basing off like a decision-making matrix that we use to that we will use for a membership to decide collectively what projects that the group will invest in. So we're exploring what it looks like for collective decision-making to occur in terms of projects. That doesn't necessarily these will be factors in terms of, representation on the creative teams, representation in the current producing teams, representation on stage, all of these things will be factors, but they're not necessarily that has to happen or we won't do it or so on and so forth. It'll be up to the membership at large, and we'll have people that are able to take these projects and then say, this is what this is as a snapshot, and then decisions will be made by the group is the plan. Which sounds complicated.
Each investor, regardless of their investment amount, will have one equal vote. So we'll present different projects to folks, and through the threshold of responsibility, we'll paint a picture of how well a given production is meeting the industry standard group's values, which is to champion BIPOC-led and BIPOC-centric stories, and then each member who is an investor through Second Act Theatrical Capital will get one equal vote to vote which projects we pursue.
Owen, is there anything else? I have a couple questions I wanted to ask, but
there's a couple of quick questions about logistics. What is the age limit for the workshops, and is your 10-week course free?
Yep, it is free, and it is open to anyone 18 and up who identifies as a person of color.
Great. Can we share this information with people who might be interested, or is this only for TRU?
It's for everyone. It's for everyone.
Great. And last but not least, will the industry standard group invest in shows or donate?
It's an investment vehicle. Well, as a commercial model, we are interested in stakeholding into the projects.
And Miranda, from her not-for-profit background, is probably very sensitive to the differences between the kind of money that you bring into an investment and the kind of money you bring into a not-for-profit. But
TPOC is a not-for-profit as well, I believe, right, Miranda?
It's a fiscally sponsored organization, so all of our financing is tax deductible.
Okay. I wanted to go back to a few things that we touched on earlier. I want to go back to the Broadway season, the breakthrough Broadway season, yay, which happened during COVID, so who knows what the results really mean. Are you aware of any change that's happened as a result of that? Do you think that there's more openness to BIPOC-driven projects now, or are we still the same place we were last year? And by the way, I want to actually make note of the fact that we've had our first Indigenous Broadway production. The only thing that came close was, I was told by one of our members, was like in 1920s and 30s, Lynn Riggs had a play called Green Grow the Lilacs. But now we have the Thanksgiving play, and I think that's a breakthrough. The problem with breakthroughs is they're exciting in the moment, and sometimes something happens after them, and sometimes nothing changes. So, and I guess, you know, it goes back to evolution that you were talking about, Rob. Are we evolving?
I would say yes. I also think I am a naturally optimistic person. I think that it's easy for our industry collectively to be cynical to some extent, especially in New York. And, you know, we don't offer, like I mentioned earlier, the concept of grace. We don't offer collective grace to a lot of things, like, especially on like working on a show like A Bad Cinderella, where there was just so much loaded things before we even got onto that stage. And the sort of a lot of, you know, online kind of, you know, chatter
Snark,
that was going on. Yeah, and
snark.
it's just, and so like I think there's a world where like that kind of, it's easy to kind of go, well, what has changed? How, if it's not fast enough, then what is it? And I think that there's, this is again related to activism for me, where these things like you, the work has to continue. Like even if you don't, even if it feels like you're not moving or you're moving backwards, that can't negate the process of doing it. Right. So I would say yes. I think that there, Realize Love is a great example to some extent. Like it's a project that Miranda and I are both a part of, that the lead producers from the beginning really reached out to the Filipino, Phil-Am, and AAPI communities and are sort of engaging, you know, those communities at many of the steps in the production. For a show that was, you know, originally didn't have a lot of that representation on its creative teams, they made a really specific move to go, okay, well, we can't do that this time around. So as an experience, I've been really, it's chaotic, but I think it's a needed process to actually have to happen. And um, it's probably the most flexible team in terms of what they're granting the Filipino Phil-Am and AAPI community in terms of engagement into the show. So in that regard, I do think that there are shifts happening in terms of the kind of conversations that producers are having about the shows that are they're either holding or that are already coming into the space. So yes, but will it be, you know, something that is innately commercially measurable in the next season or two? Who knows? Because the metrics by which we measure success we previously did pre-pandemic are still out the window. The audiences aren't back at full force. Like numbers are kind of like, you know, flux here and there. Like awards don't necessarily have as much pull anymore. Like all of these things are factors that,
Or a script. They're not going to have a
yeah.
script this year.
So all these things are factors that like previously would be like, that would never do well, or that would do really well, have bucked trends. So the glut of shows that are more diverse into this space, I'll take just to get them on the boards, because that will change at least historically demographic, and that can sway a thing. You can point to it and say that season as a could potentially be an outlier, but at least was the start of a thing, and you can point to it historically.
It also means that people but in the BIPOC community are getting credits on their resumes because they can say I've been on Broadway. So it's helping careers in the same way that any credit helps the, you know, anybody's career, especially a Broadway credit is very useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Miranda, what do you think what would you like to see happen over the next couple of years? And what do you think is possible that might happen over the next couple of years to bring us closer to seeing the diversity on stage that we have in our population?
You know, I think I hope that the support for artistic development is still in the same shape that it is today, if not better. I think, you know, coming from the nonprofit world, a lot of nonprofits have been at the forefront of giving newer, younger artists their first shot, giving them financial resources, the space and time to develop work. And I think nonprofits are still bouncing back, and I hope that we can continue supporting artists so that they can focus on making the best theater that they can, because I do still think it's really hard for artists to make a living in theater, and they have many more options now with TV and film, not currently, but TV and film and content creation on social media. So in order to make room for new stories, we need to make sure that those artists are set up for success. So I hope that we can continue finding ways to do that as producers. I also care deeply about audience development, and not just in the sense of bringing more folks of color to the theater, but younger audiences to the theater. And I think there will have to be changes in the way that we communicate with those audiences via marketing and advertising and press. I had my Broadway debut as a co-producer on K-pop, the musical, which I personally adored, and the people who I saw coming back night after night were very clearly not the traditional theater going audience. They were young, and they were folks of color, and I think there can be different modes of communicating with those audiences that could just improve our communication channels that haven't been totally tapped into yet. So I'm interested in, for sure, those two areas.
I want to say that the whole issue of getting younger people in theater has been a recurring theme for decades and decades and decades. Theater has never been a medium that has been appreciated. Well, it hasn't been inviting enough to young audiences. Thank God young audiences age into old audiences, and then they start coming to theater. But I agree with you that we're still looking for that mystery, that secret sauce, that mystery formula that is going to actually start engaging younger audiences. And what I've actually heard over the past couple of years, over the last 5 years, is that the younger audience likes to be engaged in a different way. They like to be interactive. They like to be actively involved. And so I wonder if it takes a different kind of production to engage younger audiences. Any thoughts? Here Lies Love. Here Lies Love is one of the examples of a piece that successfully engaged younger audiences when it was at the public. And I assume that the hope is it's going to do it again, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a strategy around, again, the process with Here Lies Love, for me, my experience, and I'm not going to speak from random experience, but I've been really, really impressed of how thoughtful some of the choices they've made are, even in terms of like when the show is going up. Like there was talk of doing it this spring, trying to get it in before the Tonys, and I actually think a summer opening was a really, really smart idea because of the nature of the show as an event, and the commitment to the concept of the show and success off Broadway, and mirroring that and scaling it up, even though there's an expense there. But that's part of that magic that makes that show, makes Here Lies Love the experience to go to. It would have been a very different thing if it had to be sort of like traditionally restaged. So the fact that we're able to make this like bold move and literally empty out one of the biggest houses on Broadway to make the show happen, I think is the thing that's going to attract audiences outside of the traditional theater going audiences. They'll be like, that's crazy. Like, yeah, I want to go to a disco and like be amongst the people and do these things that are more like in the realm of immersive Sleep No More style experiences. Because I think that's the direction.
So I know that Miranda has to leave. I don't know if you have to leave as well, Rob. Just tell me.
I can stay until 7.
Oh, good. So Miranda, I want to thank
Miranda,
you.
hi, it's Mila. May I ask a quick question of Miranda? Miranda,
Sure.
I went to Juilliard with Maria Lonnie Macenas. Does that name ring a bell with you?
What's
She
the
was
name?
Lonnie Macenas.
There's a Lainey Sakakura in my class for theater producers of color.
I love Lainey.
I don't think it's the same person you're talking about though.
Lonnie Macenas was one of the gals that the president of the Philippines, his wife had a group
Oh.
of performers, and she was the #1 performer. We went to Juilliard together. She was a brilliant coloratura soprano, and she would get involved with all kinds of
Mila,
yes.
Miranda.
So I just
promise her
just wanted to throw that out there, and I'll let you go. Forgive me.
Oh, no,
thank you
no,
so
no
much. I just
problem
wanted
at
to throw
all.
her name out there. Thank you. Thank you,
Well,
Bob.
thank you. Rob is also on the show, so you know, if there's a way to learn more about that person who is from our Filipino community, that'd be great. But thank you
I'll put
all
my info in
for
the-
having me, and see you around. Have a good weekend.
Bye,
Thank you,
Miranda.
Miranda. I'm going to do a little wind up for the YouTube and podcasts. So thank you, Miranda, and thank you, Rob, for being with us. I thank you for an honest conversation. It actually wasn't as difficult as I was anticipating, but the area of DEI is very, very tricky to talk about in a meaningful way. There's lots of ways of gliding over the surface of it, but being meaningful is hard. So I want to thank everybody out there in podcast land and in YouTube land for being with us. And hopefully you'll email me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com. And you can be in the room and you can ask questions and be part of the conversation. Thank you, all of you out there. We do this as a community service, which is why we make it pay what you can, which is often free. We have a free button. The free button is always there for you. But if you want to actually help us move into the live performance world, which is more expensive than the Zoom world, consider giving a donation at trudonate.com, trudonate.com. And join us next week when we have Tim Kashani, who's going to talk about AI, which is very much in the news right now. And one of the reasons why there's a strike going on. But we're going to talk about other aspects of AI because Tim Kashani uses AI and other virtual kinds of virtual reality formats to develop new works. And so it should be an interesting conversation. Join us next week, please. And that's it for tonight. Thank you, everyone.